What's up, everyone? This is Lucas Ross Sports, and you're watching my Lucas Ross Sports channel. It's time to go over the AP Top 25 after week number 9 and heading into week number 10 of the 2022 college football season. Week number 9 was, not really a quiet week. We had some, games that, were really close, and also we had some games that turned out to be upsets. There were a lot of upsets this past weekend. I mean, you look at the Wake Forest versus Louisville game. That game ended up not being all that close. We had some blowouts. Kansas State versus Oklahoma State ended up being a blowout as well. I'm going to give you my honest thoughts on the top 25 in this video. At the top 25 college football playoff top 25 is starting tomorrow. We're gonna have a new schedule here on this channel. We'll have the top 25 AP poll on today. We have this one today, and then tomorrow we have the college football playoff rankings. But I'm going to still do those New Year's Six Bowls on Tuesday. Wednesday, I'll do the college football playoff rankings. I'll give you my honest thoughts on the rankings. And then on Thursday, I will do the upset alert videos. And then we'll think of something to do on Friday as well. So stay tuned for those videos. Well, let's get right into it here with the AP Top 25 poll after week number 9 and heading into week number 10. We start from 21 through 25, UCF at rank number 25. UCF coming off a big-time upset win over Cincinnati. That was probably the biggest win, for UCF this season so far. And like I said, I think the American, Atlantic Conference is pretty much wide open. I mean, look at this conference. 3 teams are battling for that top spot. Tulane, Cincinnati, and then UCF is now joined in. Cincinnati is now out of the top 25, so, I mean, after that win over, Cincinnati, I think it's a pretty clear that UCF is a top 25 team, which I knew they would be ranked, perhaps, coming into that game, or coming after that game. So, I mean, UCF, this is a good football team, and they're 6-2 on the year. Oregon State, another new addition into the top 25, 6-2 on the year. This is a good Oregon State team. They've had some couple tough losses, here and there, but this is a good, team that you don't want to sleep on in the Pac-12. I mean, they still have to play Oregon on the schedule, which will be tough, but, they can win that game. They can basically win that game, even though Oregon is off and running. They're coming off a win against Cal, but Oregon State, I think, is a great top 25 team, and I think they will stay in the top 25, maybe for the rest of the year. You never know. Liberty at number 23. This is a pretty good, group of 5 team. Liberty, they only have one loss on the year. Of course, that really, hurted them a little bit. But this team right here is really well coached. I don't really study Liberty that much, so there's not really much to talk about Liberty other than they are 7-1 and now a new addition into the top 25. Syracuse at number 22. They're 6-2. Are coming off that loss to Notre Dame, which was a big upset. Notre Dame went on the road and defeated this Syracuse team. Now they've lost 2 straight. They've lost to Clemson this past week, or 2 weeks ago, and now they lost to Notre Dame this past weekend. So Syracuse right now is in pretty big trouble. Ever since starting, at 6-0, I mean, this team is pretty much out of the Atlantic contention for the ACC championship game. So Syracuse, sitting there at number 22. If they do lose probably this weekend, they're going to pretty much be out of that top 25. NC State at number 21. They're 6-2. Coming off a 1-point win in their game against Virginia Tech. It was a lot closer. I think it's just because of the absence of Devin Laurie. I mean, he's out for the rest of the year. So NC State, this is a new team that, has just been kind of up and down lately. So we don't really have much to talk about NC State, but, they almost did lose that game to Virginia Tech. That was a closer game than we thought it would be. It was not on my upset alert video, but I think it pretty much could have been an upset alert type game. But NC State, they come out with the win there just by 1 point. Let's go through 16 through 20 now. Wake Forest, blowout loss to Louisville this past weekend. They moved down 10 spots in the top 25. This is still a good Wake Forest team. I'm not going to lie, this is still a good team, but, they're pretty much their playoff hopes are over. And, that schedule, really set up nicely for them to, maybe perhaps, get a playoff berth or something like that. And probably head on to the ACC championship. But you got to look at the schedule. Wake Forest, lost to Clemson, already, so I pretty much say they are out of that contention. And Clemson is pretty much one of the top teams in the Atlantic Division in the ACC. So, but Wake Forest, it was a tough loss to Louisville. I mean, pretty embarrassing, perhaps for Wake Forest fans. I mean, that game was a blowout. It didn't really prove to be all that close. Tulane at number 19, they're 7-1 on the year. This is a good Tulane team, and I'm expecting them to be really good for the rest of the way. I mean, not much to talk about Tulane, but they have a chance to win the American Athletic Conference, at the end of the year. I mean, it's going to come down to a first place, three-way tie, perhaps. I mean, Cincinnati is still in that conversation, even though they lost to UCF, and then UCF just joined that conversation as well. So Tulane at number 19, they're 7-1. Oklahoma State at number 18, another team that really took a blowout loss this past weekend to Kansas State. That game right there was one of the worst games I've ever seen Oklahoma State played in a long time. Now their playoff hopes are over. I mean, they still have the chance to make the Big 12 championship game. Maybe they get a rematch against, Kansas State perhaps, but TCU clearly is at the top of the Big 12 right now. We'll talk about TCU in just a minute, but Oklahoma State right now sitting at number 18. They moved down 9 spots after that loss to Kansas State. So yeah, I would say they moved down a bunch of spots after that game, because they got shut out in that game 48-0 against the Wildcats. North Carolina at number 17, they're 7-1. North Carolina was pretty much behind in that Pitt game, but they came back. The offense started rolling in that game, and they had a better second half. This is a good North Carolina team. I'm pretty much they're heading into the ACC championship game because they are in control in the Coastal Division. Miami is not in that conversation. Pitt's pretty much out of that conversation. And, Duke had a chance probably to beat North Carolina, but North Carolina is at the top of the ACC Coastal Division, so I could see this team moving on to the ACC championship game. They're sitting there at 7-1. If you look at the offense for this North Carolina team, they might have a chance to really match up with that Clemson defense in the ACC championship, but we still got 4 more weeks to go, and it's going to be a really, tough 4 weeks for North Carolina. But we'll see how they do for the rest of the year. Penn State at number 16. They moved down here, not by a bunch, but, they moved to 6-2 on the year. I think we can clearly say that Penn State is out of that Big Ten East conversation. I mean, they've lost to Michigan and they lost to Ohio State. Looking at that game, Penn State really turned the ball over so many times. And they turned the ball over 4 times in that game. And like I said, turnovers really change, the game a lot. That's been the, what the season's been all about. Turnovers really change a lot, in the game, and the team just scores on them and then starts pulling away. So Ohio State pulled away in that game. Penn State kept it close for a while, but it wasn't enough. But I like the fight that Penn State put on in that game. Hopefully they maybe finish out the year at 10-2. All right, let's go from 11 through 15. LSU at number 15. They had a bye week, so not really much to talk about LSU. They'll play Alabama at home this Saturday. What a game that's going to be. I think LSU versus Alabama will be probably a defensive game perhaps. And if LSU can pressure Bryce Young at quarterback, LSU might have a chance to win the game. So, I mean, LSU could potentially pull off a big upset here this Saturday against Alabama. Illinois at number 14. They're 7-1. I think they also had a bye week this past weekend, so not much to talk about Illinois. I mean, they are rolling in the Big Ten West, and pretty much the only team that is at the top of the Big Ten West. I mean, Purdue pretty much out of that conversation, perhaps. I mean, you look at, Purdue, they lost to Wisconsin. I mean, Illinois pretty much at the top of the Big Ten West. I mean, Minnesota, I mean, I could see them maybe perhaps making a jump there, but Illinois is clearly the top team in the Big Ten West right now. So not much to talk about the Fighting Illinois. Kansas State at number 13. Kansas State made a pretty big jump. They went from number 22 to number 13 here. Kansas State blowing out Oklahoma State. We know how that game went around. Kansas State just played their best game. Backup quarterback Will Howard played pretty well. I was pretty impressed with his performance, against this Oklahoma State team. And Kansas State is a really good, team in the Big 12. I mean, they can pretty much finish first. Like I said, they lost to, TCU, but, maybe they can finish out the year at 10-2 and perhaps go to the Big 12 championship. And then it would be TCU versus Kansas State, perhaps in a rematch. maybe if, they get Adrian Martinez back at quarterback, I think Kansas State can pull off a big win there at the end of the year. But still a long way to go. 4 weeks left to go. Anything can happen in the Big 12. Honestly, anybody can win that conference, but I think some of those teams are out of that conversation. I just think it comes down to TCU, Kansas State, and, of course, Oklahoma State. Utah at number 12. Utah coming off a really close win against Washington State on the road. Survived in that game. That was one of those upset alert type games, perhaps. Washington State pretty much had a chance. I mean, Utah did not play well in this game, but, we'll see how they go in the rest of the Pac-12. Maybe they were overlooking, Washington State. Maybe they were getting ready for the Oregon game, which happens pretty soon. So, I mean, Utah, I think, is looking forward to that Oregon game. That's going to be a big-time matchup there in the Pac-12, and I think both of those teams are pretty even on offense and defensively. But Oregon has been pretty, well improved ever since that first game of the year. Remember, both of these teams lost to SEC teams in week number 1. And Utah's, loss in the second game, came, back then, and of course to UCLA. So, I mean, Utah pretty much sitting there at number 12. Ole Miss back on track after a win. They're sitting there at 8-1. Ole Miss came off a win against Texas A&M on the road. That game was a lot closer than, the experts say because, I mean, it is a road game, perhaps. I mean, honestly, Ole Miss was going to have a tough time in that game ever since that loss to LSU. But they came away in that game, and Ole Miss got a late touchdown to secure the game. So, Ole Miss sitting there at 8-1. They still have to play Alabama on the schedule, which is going to be tough. And then they also have to play Mississippi State. But number 11 is Ole Miss. Let's go to the 6 through 10 now. UCLA at number 10. They had a bye week, I believe actually they won in their game as well. So UCLA coming off a win against Stanford this past weekend. So not much to talk about them other than they got back on track after losing to Oregon on the road. USC at number 9. USC had a pretty tough game, against Arizona. What a game that turned out to be. It was a shootout type game. USC, though, they played pretty good offense. I mean, Caleb Williams was unstoppable in that game, threw 5 touchdown passes. You could see Caleb Williams is starting to get better. You could see this USC team starting to get better. Their only loss is to Utah this year. I mean, they could still possibly make the Pac-12 championship. And, perhaps they could play Oregon in that Pac-12 championship. Perhaps that could happen, but we'll see how the Pac-12 goes for the rest of the year. And speaking of the Pac-12, Oregon at number 8, they've come off a big win, against UCLA. And then they beat Cal on the road, which, Oregon had a tough time in that game. They give up 24 points in that game. Like I said, it was one of those games that Oregon couldn't sleep on because it was a game that, Cal could potentially pull off an upset. And they scored 24 points in that game, but Oregon pulled away like any other team. I mean, Bo Nix came in there with a lot of confidence, and you could see Bo Nix is starting to get better as the season ends here at the end of the year. So Oregon at number 8, TCU at number 7. They keep rolling. They beat West Virginia on the road. They're sitting there at 8-0. Do I think TCU should be ahead of Alabama? Well, no, because TCU hasn't really played, a big challenge in the Big 12. Yes, they beat Oklahoma State. I mean, they beat Oklahoma State already. They beat Kansas State, but those were not high-ranked top 25 teams. Those were not high-ranked teams. Oklahoma was not ranked, when they played, or actually, Oregon, I think Oklahoma was ranked, but, that turned out to be a disastrous Oklahoma team than we expected. So TCU at number 7, Alabama, just talked about them. They come off a bye week, and now they play LSU this weekend. That is going to determine if Alabama will still probably make the college football playoff, but this is a game that really comes down, to the wire. I think both teams are pretty even on defense and offense. I mean, LSU, you look at their performance against Ole Miss this, the past couple weeks. They were really good on that side of the ball. Alabama, I mean, their defense looked a lot better against Mississippi State. I mean, they got shut down by that, Tennessee offense. I mean, that Tennessee loss still hurts Alabama, but I still think they're still a really good team that can possibly go to the college football playoff and also the SEC championship. All right, to the top 5 now. Clemson at number 5, Michigan at number 4, Ohio State at number 3, Tennessee at number 2, and then Georgia at number 1. Now, Tennessee and Ohio State had a tiebreaker for number 2, but with the most votes, they went with Tennessee. So I put Tennessee here at number 2. Let's talk about Clemson, though, first. They had a bye week. They will play Notre Dame on the road this Saturday. That's going to be a big-time matchup. I mean, Notre Dame upsetted Syracuse already. Clemson could potentially lose that game. I know it's not a, big deal if they lose that game, but it is a big deal. I mean, they still have to probably make the college football playoff if they still want to go in there as a one-loss team. But Clemson, they're at number 5. Michigan, coming off that win against Michigan State. Pretty much all these top 5 teams, or these top 4 teams from Michigan to Georgia, all took care of business this weekend. Michigan, they were in a tough contest with Michigan State for a while, but the offense came and, strike in that second half, and that defense really played pretty well. So I think Michigan is still a, good top 4 team. Ohio State pulled away in that game against Penn State. The defense really forced some turnovers in this game, and that's what we need from Ohio State. If their defense can force some turnovers, this is a good Ohio State team for the rest of the year. The offense, really clicked in as well. C.J. Stroud looked pretty good in that game, so Ohio State at number 3. Tennessee at number 2. They defeated Kentucky this past weekend. Wasn't even close at all that we, thought it would be. I mean, I thought it would be a lot closer than the experts say. Tennessee, though, they're undefeated heading into this weekend. And speaking of that, Georgia and Tennessee play this weekend. That is probably the biggest game of the weekend. I mean, besides Tennessee and Alabama, early in the, the third Saturday in October. Now it's Tennessee and Georgia, the biggest game probably in November of the year. This game's at 3:30 p.m. on CBS. That's going to be a big-time game there between these two teams. And Georgia at number 1, they defeated Florida, pulled away after, turning the ball over a few times. And Georgia, pulled away in that game against Florida. Tennessee forced some turnovers on the Kentucky offense. I mean, both defenses look pretty good. I mean, offensively, Tennessee has maybe the better offense in the country. But Georgia, watch out for them. I think they were overlooking Florida a little bit, but maybe Georgia was ready for Florida. Tennessee was obviously ready for Kentucky. They were not looking ahead to Georgia. But these two teams, they will get on the field this weekend. That is the top 25 rankings for the AP poll from week number 9, or actually after week number 9 and heading into week 10. And stay tuned here for more on the Lucas Ross Sports Channel.